talk is in conjunction with the year 2023 being the year of the millet. Our speaker today will be taking us through a story of millets. I have the privilege to introduce our talker for today. He goes by the name of Gerhard Basson, who is a PhD student in the Department of Biotechnology at the University of Western Cape. In this field, he predominantly focuses on plant science using biotechnological tools, i.e., microbiology, molecular biology, and biochemistry, all to investigate the mechanism of crop resilience and productivity under adverse conditions to improve food security and safety. Also note, the National Science Week is an initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation implemented by the South African Agency for Science and Technology, also known as SASTA, which is a business unit of the National Research Foundation. So for today's talk, we will be listening to what Gerhard has to bring to us tonight. If you have any questions throughout the talk, feel free to post them into the chats. We will be having a Q&A session at the end for, for Gerhard to answer any of your questions. Okay, I hope everyone is ready for tonight's talk, and I will hand over to Gerhard to take us further. Thank you, Gerhard.
Okay, just give me a moment to share my slide. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, thank you so much, Shankly. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Gerhard Basson, and as Shankly said, I'll be telling you a story about millet. And this is in collaboration with National Science Week and also it being Year of the Millet. So the entire title of my talk is Indigenous African Cereal Crops Can Contribute to Mitigation of the Impact of Climate Change on Food Security. And this is a story specifically about millets. So to get into it, we can't really start without talking about food security. And what food security essentially means is that everybody has physical and economic access to sufficient nutritious food and safe foods, and this is for a healthy diet and for a healthy lifestyle, because as the saying essentially goes, you are what you eat. So if you are eating healthy, nutritious foods, it will afford you to live a healthy lifestyle. However, as much as this is something that globally a lot of countries do try to strive for, there are some factors or some challenges that do limit food security, and this would include factors such as the demand for food, as well as food wastage. It's a big problem where food perhaps gets discarded because it doesn't meet certain criteria of industry. Maybe a carrot is too small, or it looks weird, it looks like two carrots instead, it might get discarded. You also have factors such as food cost, and by that we're referring to the agricultural input, and I'll get a bit give a few examples of that in a bit. And then another large issue is the limitation of arable land, so fertile land for agriculture, and then the available water as well. In terms of another big issue would also be the malpractice in agriculture, such as monoculture. And what that refers to is growing the same crop on the same piece of land over a period of time. And what that does is that really drains the nutrients in the soil. And then that further adds to limiting the amount of arable land. And then you also have the excessive use of pesticides as well as herbicides. And that increases your agricultural input because farmers are now having to spend money on these pesticides and herbicides. And then also even the cost of fertilizer. So having nutrient poor soils, having to throw a lot of money towards fertilizer, all increases the price at which the farmer is going to sell that product, which then impacts us as the consumer. So another factor that is also one of the biggest challenges to food security and will be a big challenge in the future is climate change as a result of global warming. And this negatively contributes to security. And why it's so important is that food security essentially forms the foundation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is goals set up by the UN, and all countries essentially want to achieve this. But you will often find that at the foundation of this, sufficient food supply is sort of the main underlying factor. So seeing that we're talking about millets fall within a category of cereals. And just a bit of background on cereals, they are the edible components of grains of cultivated grass, and they will include basically things like, as you can see in the picture, things like maize, rice. You also have oats, and they are generally produced as a good source of carbohydrates, dietary fiber, and other vitamins and minerals as well. And because of this high carbohydrate content is the reason actually why cereals are the staple of many countries. And I've already listed out the examples that are grown globally. So essentially, in large part, a lot of countries essentially depend on these crops. I mean, even in South Africa, it's difficult to imagine a meal without rice or wheat or maize or oats in the morning. It's a constant thing in our diets. So, as we previously mentioned, 2023 is the International Year of the Millet, as outlined by the UN. They're celebrating it this year, and what this means is to bring awareness about millets to the public so that we can um, basically start speaking about how to implement these things. And millets are actually a great option for cereal diversity because they are cereals themselves. So when we speak about millets, we specifically refer to these small seeded grasses. So millet seeds will often be a bit smaller than, for example, the seeds of mealies, and those are then cultivated as grain crops. However, in our country, South Africa, these crops are basically underutilized. Mostly it's your subsistence farmers that are growing them, or your small scale farmers. And essentially, that's not on the commercial market. So we're not exporting really, or it's not as readily available in our market. And it's actually a pity that this is the case because these crops are often a lot more tolerant to extreme environments. So this means if there's heat waves, if there's lack of rain, such as droughts, and then also these crops can grow in nutrient poor soils. So that again comes back into you don't need to add as much nutrients into the soil, so you can produce crops with lower input and sell at a lower cost, and people can then afford it. And examples of them will include sorghum, teff, pearl millet, foxtail millet, as well as finger millet. So one of the reasons why millets has also gained the attention for the year 2023 is that out of the Sustainable Development Goals that I previously just briefly touched on, millets actually contribute to about 6 of these goals. And you can see the 6 in the slide as the zero hunger, there's good health and well-being, decent work and economic growth, responsible consumption and production, climate action, as well as partnership for goals. And just as a fun fact, millets are also naturally gluten-free. And I feel like that's an important thing to keep in mind when we have the rise in diseases associated with gluten consumption. So for people who are gluten intolerant, they can then perhaps move towards millets as well as an alternative to conventional cereals such as corn or rice or wheat or oats or any other gluten containing cereal. So in South Africa specifically, though, um, our grain industry is still mainly comprised of barley, maize, oats and sorghum, and wheat as well. And it's used in a wide number of industries, such as farmers, bakers, research organizations. We have it for human consumption. This is a typical thing that's done in our country, frying mealies. You also have it being processed into this flour, maizena, and you also have some sweeteners being made out of maize as well. And then there's also the animal feed aspect of it. So it's because of this that corn is actually one of the largest locally grown field crops in South Africa. You can see our production is about 12.8 million tons of maize, and we consume about 11.8 million of that. And even though this, just to mention, this is the average production like over 10 years, and even though it looks like we're producing sort of enough to feed ourselves, it's still quite a close number. So you could imagine a world where, or a country where something happens and our maize production falls, then obviously the price of goods would go up because all these downstream industries would be affected by it. So we would see a rise in the cost of maize-related products as well as beef or poultry even. Everything would essentially go up, all the industries that depend on maize. So another factor that is the reason why I had to bring the slide in is maize uses quite a bit of water to grow, and South Africa is a country that experiences these periodic droughts, and it's because of this we are also called a semi-arid country, so we don't receive a lot of rainfall. Even though in winter time you would think it's a lot of water, it's not really if you look a lot if you compare it to global rainfall. So we receive about 464 millimeters. And then we have factors such as climate change and global warming, and this influences whether droughts occur and how often they occur, and also at what intensity they occur. And then that obviously puts water restrictions on us, and hence the remember day zero. There's also the other things that contribute to drought. There's this El Nino weather event, and this basically influences drought patterns in South Africa. I've seen research that has suggested that the 2015, that drought period could have been as a result of El Nino as well. And essentially what this is, it's when you have this unusual warming of the water at the equatorial plane, and I have a schematic over here. So you can see in this region over here, it's becoming a lot warmer, about 5 degrees warmer. So that could mean that South Africa might experience drought in the next couple of years as well. And over here, you can see this is the linked article, just announcing that El Nino is here. And for reference, this is what the rainfall was like leading up to the day zero, where we just had less and less rainfall during our rainy season. So this is from July to August, which we know is in the Western Cape particular is quite a our rainy season. And if you compare this data or this figure to this figure, you can already see that during 2015 there was a lot less rain over here, whereas 2023 we're getting sufficient over here, and even the rest of the country is quite dry throughout during the 2015 period. So we can very easily go from this to this, but we could also very easily go from this to this. So drought is a problem in South Africa, and it does have a large impact on our agriculture and thereby our food. So with all of this in mind, I thought it best to basically include this paper that we published in 2021. So the authors are myself over there, and then we have Dr. Ali as well, and then we're under the supervision of Professor Ludidi, who runs the plant stress tolerance lab. And you can see the title of our paper is basically the same as the title of our presentation, and it was published in the Journal of Oasis Agriculture and Sustainable Development with our Tunisian partners. This is one of our collaborators over there, Prof. Panao Padri. And this is just to show you how far Tunisia is from South Africa. It's all the way the northernmost point on the continent. And the reason why we work together is because as a result of future climate change, our countries are set essentially to face off against similar environmental um, issues. And therefore, through working together, we try to solve these issues by making the best of what's available in each respective country. So back to our paper. Sorry, I rambled off a bit, but back to our paper. One of the first things that our paper focuses on is the millets themselves. And for that, we focused on 4 of them, which is namely sorghum, pearl millet, finger millet, and teff. And if you remember the image that I showed just a bit ago about maize, I said we can consume maize and we can make flour out of it, and it can be used as animal feed. And this is the nice thing about incorporating millets as well, is that with all of these millets, as you can see, you have a application for human consumption, you have it being produced into flour, and then you also have it as animal feed. So this means that we could this has major potential to open up new industries, maybe create new jobs, if we move towards growing these sorts of crops. And it will also basically, if I go to the next slide, the more important thing is that with these crops we can have stable yields even if we have less water. So this is another figure from the paper. And basically what we did here is we compared the average rainfall. We had the average rainfall of South Africa, which is the 464 millimeters. And we looked at how much water these millets that we investigated in this paper used compared to maize. And if you look at the graph, essentially what you can see is these millets are using less water than maize, and they also fall below the amount of rain that South Africa receives on average. And even though sorghum, which is a millet, seems to use the same, if not a little bit more than maize in terms of water, early work from Dr. Ali has actually shown that sorghum, when it comes to drought or water shortages, sorghum actually can still have stable yields or sufficient yields, even with this less water. So from this point of view, millets actually equal more food and less water. And I think that's important in a country where water is a scarce thing. So then another aspect of the paper, this work was done mainly by Dr. Ali. And this was looking at the nutritional profile of millets because it's pointless to say, oh, this thing grows well if there's less rain, but then what about nutrition? So Dr. Ali then did most of this work, and he compared the nutrient profile of each of these millets relative to maize, which is the current most grown grain in South Africa. And the green basically indicates where the millets have higher amounts of respect of these nutrients, and the red indicates at the point at which maize basically has a bit more. And if you look at this table, you can see that maize basically only has more carbohydrates, it has more fat, and more vitamin B, whereas millets actually have a lot more of a whole variety of nutrients. So it would be a good idea to incorporate millets either into your diet, either one of them or a mixture of them, or combine, or even combining them with maize, so that you, when you're eating, you're getting a more nutritious full as opposed to just empty carbs. Another thing that also stands out for me about millet, or specifically finger millet, is that it has a lot of calcium. So this might be a good animal feed for chickens because when chickens lay eggs, they lose a large amount of calcium from their bodies to form the shell. And often when we go take the egg and we sell it in the shops, the chicken doesn't get to eat the eggshell that remains behind to replenish its calcium. So perhaps for chickens, if you're raising chickens just for egg production, it might be a good idea to incorporate finger millet into their diet, especially if they're just after they've done laying their eggs, so that they can replenish that calcium in their system. So continuing on the nutrition of millets, we also looked at the essential amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. You'll often see these high protein on certain products, and in total there are about 20 amino acids known, and here you can see Future Life says that they have about 19, so there should be about 19 in this list on the side. So the reason why the amino acids are important is also it determines the quality of protein that you are eating. So if you are eating something that is supposedly high in protein, but there's only 3 amino acids in it, then you're basically eating a lot of a non-diverse or a non-amino. It's not diverse in terms of its amino acids, so it's a lower quality of protein in my opinion. Whereas if you're eating something that maybe has 19 amino acids in, or 20, or the full 20, or even 5 or so, then you're getting a more higher quality protein in terms of your intake. And so you see sort of similar trends over here where there are selected areas where millets have higher amounts of certain amino acids than maize. So once again, this would be then a good for meal supplementation. So you have a more nutritious meal both for humans and for animals. So therefore, millets essentially mean more food. Um, and one of the things that we didn't really touch on in our paper was the fact that millets can grow very well in infertile soils. So this means that your agricultural input is already reduced because you don't need to add a lot of fertilizer to the soil. You don't need to worry about that fertilizer running off and contaminating water sources. So you're already lowering a lot of your costs just by not having to put all that fertilizer into the soil. And this was also just to this article over here to highlight the issue that poor soils is a huge limitation for Africa's food security. Um, this is one of the international maize and wheat improvement centers. So they do focus a lot on working with maize and wheat and what's limiting their production. So perhaps for Africa, if poor soils are our issue, we need to grow things that are adapted to poor soils instead of investing a lot of money into just trying to make the soils better effectively by adding synthetic inputs. And then also another advantage of the millets effectively is that they can withstand high temperatures and low rainfall. And as I mentioned, South Africa is a semi-arid country, so we do receive low rainfall, but we also have areas where the temperatures get quite high, and those may not be suitable for crops such as or cereals that like maize, but um, definitely we can give the millets a chance in those sorts of areas. So, in conclusion, effectively, the reason over time people have lost the interest in the use of these indigenous crops, and there's been a preference for commercial crops. So this is what I've read in an article that I've just covered recently in preparation for the presentation. But I think that is actually only about 50% of the story because public awareness of these indigenous crops are also important. You need to educate the public about it if you want to create a market for it. And then thereafter, there also needs to be implementation of initiatives and programs and public policies about alternative cereals such as these millets so that we can actually implement them into our current agricultural system and our food systems. And so with that, millets basically have major potential for improving food security. This is just a schematic of the steps that would be needed to be taken for a country to be food secure. So there would have to be available food. Everybody would be able to access it. There needs to be utilization of it and stability. But for me, out of all of these things, the main factor where millets would come in would be the supply, despite economic and environmental factors. So just by adopting them, because it's highly unlikely that maize would be or our current cereals would be replaced immediately. But just by adopting these alongside with these other crops, we can at least ensure that if the one set of cereals fail, we have another set of cereals. And if our production exceeds our consumption, then we could start talking about exporting these things eventually. So with that, there's extra information on it as well. Here's links, and these will be made available to you by the Cape Town Science Centre as well. There's also been this initiative launched in celebration of the Year of the Millet, and this is actually to challenge chefs because this will also be another issue with introducing these crops is people going to like how it tastes? And this is where chefs and other industries come into play, and they will have to look at recipes and things to prepare so that we can basically change our thought process and how we perceive these things alongside with um, these public awareness efforts as we are putting in tonight. So with that, I want to say thank you. I'd also like to thank Prof. Ludidi and Dr. Ali for their contribution to the paper, and then as well as the Plant Stress Tolerance Lab and all the affiliated logos. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jared from the Cape Town Science Centre. I'd just like to say thank you to Gerhard Basson for that lovely presentation. It was very interesting learning all about millets and the various crops. So what we're going to do now is we have a few questions from the audience. Jared, I'm just going to ask you a few questions and you can just answer. So we got a question from Bushle, and her question is, let me just scroll up quickly. Her question is, which country is currently using millets in their food source?
Right. So what I've read up on is India's actually doing quite a lot of work like with millets. Like they have a lot of varieties available. They've incorporated into different aspects of their diet. Like they have programs which I wish we could be on that level, but yeah, India seems to be doing quite well on
Yeah,
that
okay, so
front.
India is the front runner. Okay. Hope that answers your question, Bushle. We have another question from Abungile. She asked, can you briefly tell us what makes millets better under the drought conditions?
Okay, so to simplify, there's a lot of things that makes one plant more drought tolerant, or it's a lot of factors that govern it. But like if we just go on based on how it looks, for example, compared to a maize plant, if you look at a maize plant, it will generally have these wide, long sort of biggish leaves, whereas the millet will generally have these narrower leaves. And so that's just one form of an adaptation that they have, where if they have a smaller leaf, they lose water a lot less because there's less surface area.
Okay, perfect,
There's a
perfect.
lot of
Okay.
other things, but
Now I
I
think
think
that's a perfect
I think
answer.
we'll need a whole presentation for that.
Indeed. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Abungile. We have another question, Gerard, which is from Yamkela. And she asks, what can South Africans do to incorporate millets into our food production and our food source?
But so I think we've already sort of started now, because I think public awareness is the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, this is just my opinion. So
Yeah.
but it would just, I would think the best way would be, so we have educating people about it is the one aspect, and then if you really want to push it, it's things like if you have a policy where maybe production of millets is incentivized, and the subsistence farmers that are growing these crops already, maybe help
Mm,
them to scale up production so that they can also earn more money from it. So it's a holistic approach, but I
yeah.
feel like it needs to come with, if there are people that are willing to do it, we need to push those people to do it, because it's going to be a lot harder, in my opinion, to convince someone maybe that's growing maize to swap over completely.
Mm,
But for the people that are doing it, we need to expand on that. And there's a lot of land in the country, I feel, that is just standing, eroding away. So we can use that land basically.
indeed, indeed. Okay. Thank you, Gerard. Thanks, Amkela, for your question. We have two more questions. One from Anda. He asked, if millets have more nutrients than maize, as well as a greater yield with less water, why is maize still preferred to millets in South Africa?
That's a good question. So, in my opinion, one, we grew these crops before, and
Mm,
then over time we changed over to what the rest of the world is growing effectively. So the thing is, with maize, at least we can compete. We trying to compete with market, in my opinion, at least.
mm,
And it's sort of this. We had this old way, and then things changed, and now we're still sort of on those sort of ways, and we, as they say, we're trying to keep up, in my opinion,
yeah.
instead of trying to embrace and look at our conditions and trying to actually just say, this is what we can produce, so this is what we're going to go with.
Mm, I hear you.
So I feel like Africa needs its own green revolution effectively. I feel like that's what is still keeping maize in in its place and other crops.
Indeed. And listening from your presentation as well, it does seem like millet is best suited for our environment,
Mm.
for everything. So it doesn't make sense why we're trying to conform to the world, like you mentioned. We have another question from Mohammed Dean, and he's asking, can you comment on the flavor profile of millets compared to that of maize?
So the only, I haven't eaten all of them yet. I've had sorghum already. It's okay, but there's a taste of sorghum that I'm not too fond of.
Mm,
So I won't have too much of it. But that's why I said that is things that that like we can sort out if we get serious behind developing these crops, because at some point people will start selecting for traits. You want
yeah.
apples that are sweeter, you want texture and those sorts of things. So once
Mm,
we scale up production, then we'll start getting these varieties that maybe have less of a certain taste, or are sweeter, or is more palatable, in my opinion. But
indeed.
that's just personal opinion. Like um, I might not like it in one form, but in another form, I might eat it again. So that's why it's a bridge between farmers, scientists, government officials, and then the food industry effectively.
Indeed. Thank you, Mohammed for that question. And Jared, we have one more question. It's from Manira. She asked, how do you use the flour that we produce from millets? Can we bake bread and cakes?
Yes, yes, you can bake breads and cakes.
Okay.
Just to add to Munira's question, there's a there's a bread, the one millet teff in particular. It's very small. It's the smallest grain in the world, effectively.
Mm.
So Ethiopia uses a lot of it. They actually make this flat bread. It's called injera out of it. And because it's nutritious, so like they also had a drought, so that became a staple throughout the country, and so they could at least eat bread. But as we must say, bread is empty carbs here
Yeah.
in South Africa, so that it's a more nutritious form of bread. So yes, you can use it in your normal baking, but you'll get more out of your baking than you would with other crops,
Indeed.
maybe.
Thank you so much, Gerald, for that. I hope that answers your questions, Munira. So it appears that is all the questions. If you guys do have any other questions, you guys can send it through now. We'll give you guys about 5 minutes, and then if that is all, we will just wait. Okay. It seems like we have a few more questions, Gerard, if you are there. Um, just wait until you put your camera on. Okay, there we are. Okay, so we have another question from Anda, and he asked, where can you buy millet flake cereals as seen earlier in your presentation? I think you might be muted.
Got it.
There we go.
So unfortunately, under that picture was from a product that they sold in India. So I'm not sure if it's available in South Africa yet, but um, maybe in future, if we can take this, if we can take the year of the millet seriously, maybe we can end up to the point where you have options of Kellogg's and that basically.
Indeed. So not yet under, unfortunately. We have another question from Bushle. What are the nutritional benefits of eating millets and how do they compare to grain?
So it depends on which grain you refer to. For our paper in particular, we just compared that nutritional information of to maize particularly. So we looked at four millets, which is sorghum, teff, pearl millet, and finger millet, and we compared that nutritional content to that of maize. So I saw Haley asked the question if the paper was accessible to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe if I share it with you guys at the Science Center, and then along with the links to information about the International Year of the Millet, I'll attach the link to that paper so that anyone who wants to read up, even just comparing the nutritional information, it's there.
We will definitely share it if people want it. That's perfect.
But
We
it
have
is more than maize, if,
okay.
for quite a few things it outcompetes.
Perfect. We have another question from Munira. She's asking, will she not even find it at health shops?
I'm sure you'll get it at health shops.
Mm.
I've seen it some products at where's this place in Clicks or Discam in the smart health aisle. But the problem is that it's probably going to be a bit pricey still maybe,
Oh, I
and
see.
that's obviously affected by production. So if a lot of people aren't growing it, then the person unfortunately has to sell it at whatever price, and now it becomes inflated. So if if the production increases, then surely the price will come down.
Indeed, indeed. So yes, you can find it, but it is a bit pricey, Munira.
Depending on
And
where.
depending on where. Another question from Abungile. She asks, what are the genetic and biochemical differences between the different types of millets? And how do these differences affect the nutritional value and uses in cooking? That's a multi-part question.
Mm. Okay, so if you're referring to in terms of how closely related are by when you're referring to the genetic differences, they are like we still refer to them as millets because they are tiny grain crops. So that's like a phenotypic description.
Mm.
That's why sorghum is its own plant effectively,
Yeah,
and pearl millet is its own one, and teff is its own one. So they are quite different. But they also, well, in terms of biochemistry, I think maybe referring to phytohormones and those sorts of things. Um, but yes, there will be differences amongst all of these millets, but from what I've read up, generally there's a big buzz around millets now because of as alternative feed, not just for animals and for humans. So clearly, these crops contain things that our normal cereals normally don't contain, and these could be a lot better for us in the long run.
Indeed, I hope that answers your question, Abungile. We have another question from Bushle. What are the best practices for sustainable millet farming?
So I think millet farming in itself is the sustainable practice
Mm,
because when we looked at the amount of water used, for example, um, the funny thing about not giving a plant enough water is if you don't give it enough water, you basically deprive it of nutrients as well
yeah,
because everything works via water. So it's already sustainable to farm using less water, and it's sustainable to farm using less fertilizer as an input because we don't have to worry about eutrophication, which is when the fertilizer spills off into water sources, and now we have contaminated water sources. So millets themselves are the sustainable farming.
indeed, indeed. Another question from Yamkela. She asks, what are some organizations or initiatives that are working to promote the growth and consumption of millets, and how can we support their efforts?
Okay, so the best answer I guess I would have for that is in the link that I will attach to the page of the Food Agricultural Organization. They basically have a whole lot of things revolving around the year of the millet and who to get into contact with and what certain countries are doing um, in this basically, and how you can get involved also if you want to start something as an NPO or NGO, these sorts of things. So there's definitely a lot of information on the website that feels like they're going all out on the promotion of this. So that's why I want to make it available to for everyone.
Okay, perfect. So Anda asked another question. Is your paper accessible? But I think I can answer that one. Gerard did mention earlier that he's going to make the paper available via the Cape Town Science Center, and we will distribute it to whoever would like it. If there are no other questions, I think we will end the session now. Gerard, I just want to say another big thank you for joining us today and hosting such a informative meeting. I'm ready to go look for some millet outside and go eat some, try it. I
Start
just
in
want
your own
to,
home, Jared.
in my own home, instead of the
Start
maize
growing in your own
alternative.
home. That's the best thing.
I just want to say thank you to everyone as well that has joined. I hope you guys enjoyed the session today. Um, on another note as well, National Science Week is an initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation implemented by the South African Agency for Science and Technology Advancement, a business unit of the National Research Foundation. So just to mention that as well. If that is all, guys, I'd like to thank you guys for coming once again, and we will end our session now. Thank you.
Thank you.